Do you have the courage to ask questions like why prophets and/or saints of the past engaged in sexual activities that, by modern standards, are so difficult to accept? Let me mention a few. David, as the Bible tells us, had an affair with his general Uriah's wife, then plotted to have her husband killed in battle. Then there's another story. Solomon, or the prophet Solomon, had 1,000 wives. Only 300 of them became wives, the rest were concubines. This is extreme polygamy. Then there's the story of Lot, who even committed incest with his children. Or Abraham, he married someone, whether they were slaves or wives at the time, but what's clear is that after having a small child, his partner was immediately abandoned in the barren desert with no chance of survival. Then let's imagine the Prophet Muhammad. He also married underage children, practicing polygamy. Or let's look at sexual phenomena in non-Abrahamic religions. Let's look at Sri Krishna, for example, who was also polygamous, but his polygamy was even more extreme. He had 16,100 wives. Then there's Lord Indra. Lord Indra was the king of the gods, but he took other people's wives, cheated on them, and committed adultery with them, ultimately leading to his curse. Then there's also the god Brahma. The Puranas tell us that Brahma had a child, or created a child. Her name was Parvati. Parvati, or Sarasvati, but he ultimately fell in love with her until Shiva intervened and beheaded her. But why would his thoughts wander to that? They are the main gods of the Trimurti. Now the question is, do you have the courage to raise moral questions related to sexual activities or behavior in ancient times? Before we discuss this further, I'd like to offer a disclaimer. What we'll be examining now will be based on science, the humanities, or the social sciences, not religion. Because religion can be controversial and is related to personal biases regarding beliefs, we'll likely ignore it somewhat. In other words, we'll focus more on science, social science, and the humanities. But if you choose a religious approach, that's fine too. What's not allowed, and what I strongly discourage, is using the approach of other religions to judge a particular religion. The first point to understanding sexual issues in the past is that each religion has a different approach or perspective on the world. So trying to understand religion using other religions is actually completely absurd. One example is the matter of God. Christians think that God is one and all-powerful, but because of his extraordinary love, God incarnated, assuming human status. And because of that, he makes sacrifices, eats and drinks, socializes with his friends, and so on. That is the Christian depiction of God. Meanwhile, in the Buddhist perspective, for example, why would God have to come down to earth? Whether God exists or not, the natural mechanisms are already in place. Karma is already in place, rules already exist, and as humans we have no interest in bringing God to earth. Now, with these two very different approaches, Christians judge Buddhists and Buddhists judge Christians. It doesn't make sense because from the beginning they have a different mindset. That's the problem. Or take another example related to sexuality. Hindus consider sex to be not taboo. It's not evil. Sexual activity is a natural yet sacred relationship that demonstrates a part of the universe that is not only acceptable but should be considered a sacred part of life. Therefore, sexual activity gives birth to humans, so the process of human birth is also sacred. So pleasurable sexual activity is sacred. It's not taboo, it's not shameful. Let's compare it from an Islamic perspective. Islam considers sexual activity pleasurable, a gift from God, and part of human nature. But it must be viewed through a very exclusive lens. It's only right for certain people with certain bonds, because although sexual activity is pleasurable and sacred, it's also dangerous. It's dangerous to morals, dangerous to the survival of women in particular, dangerous to regeneration, dangerous to the population. The issue of sex can go all over the place. And because of this, Islam views sex as sacred and taboo to discuss. Meanwhile, Hindus consider sex to be something sacred but normal. With these two perspectives in mind, can Muslims then judge Hindus? Hindus always dress revealingly, don't wear hijabs, and so on. Meanwhile, Hindus could say that Muslims are outdated, that their minds are like those of a desert, and so on. It can't be harmful. So again, in this case, the first thing we have to understand is that when we look at texts dealing with sexual issues from the past, and they're associated with a particular religion, we can use an objective scientific approach, or perhaps we can use our own religious approach tailored to our own biases. But using another religion to judge this religion is completely messed up. The emphasis, if you want to understand taboo events in the past, look at them through the lens of science or their own religious context, not anything else. The second thing related to sexual activity in the past, involving holy people or sacred institutions, is about understanding the literary genre. This is also important, and it's often overlooked by those who like to debate religion. So, for example, in the case mentioned earlier, David then had an affair with a woman, he couldn't control his lust, and her husband was sacrificed in a cunning plot. Now, if Muslims see this, they'll think, wow, how could a prophet be treated like that? But if we read the Bible directly in its descriptions, those explanations aren't persuasive explanations. They're not exhorting people to do such things or that this is a good example of a prophet. No. The Bible explains things expositorily, descriptively, explaining things as they are. So, in the minds of Christians, something like that happened. Yes, it was written, it wasn't to encourage people to do the same thing, so that's how it was, but the prophet was holy, so how could he be treated like that? Yes, the concept of the prophet in Islam and in Christianity is certainly different. In Islam, the prophet is holy because he's infallible, whereas in Christianity he has the potential to commit heinous and evil acts, but he might repent, and David would also repent in the end in an incident like that. So once again, look at the genre of the writing. That doesn't mean what's written is the core of the religion's teachings. It could simply be that the religious teachings simply provide an explanation of what actually happened in the past. Or to understand another genre, Lord Krishna is depicted as having wives trying to save women and therefore having to take all of them, a considerable number, 16,000 or so. Now, don't think, wow, 16,000 wives. If Krishna rotated his wives every year, that would be 430 or so wives in one rotation. Don't think about it that way. Hindu texts typically focus on long narratives that convey specific spiritual messages, and because of this, the language associated with facts is usually hyperbolic, usually exaggerating the context of the facts, but the message is profound. So the message isn't about polygamy, right? But at that time, Lord Krishna had no choice but to save those women, so it was because this was also tied to the patriarchal culture of the past. So the idea was that to elevate the woman's status, she had to marry a mighty demigod king. Because of this, the 16,000 women were truly saved in terms of their shame, their dignity, their self-respect, and so on, because they were married to a demigod king, and so on. That's it, right? Again, regarding patriarchal morals and so on, we'll discuss this later. But again, in this case, understanding past texts must be understood according to their genre, not according to what we want them to be. And then the third tip for understanding sexual activity in the past, here's my advice. Don't assume the past is sacred, holy, or that people in the past were greater, better, or more moral than today. No, it's not like that. As people raised in a modern society, we always think that the present is inherently bad, that this is a crazy age, a dark age, the apocalypse is approaching, and because of that, morals are crumbling and so on. Meanwhile, in ancient times, people were pure, holy, sincere, and so on. Well, actually, it wasn't like that at all. And in fact, we can compare it. Ancient times were more brutal than today. In ancient times, slavery was commonplace, murder was commonplace, rape was commonplace, and so on. This was because there were no effective institutions to prevent crime in ancient times, and so on. So don't assume that events in the past were shrouded in holiness, sacredness, goodness, that everyone there was innocent, and so on. No. Let's put it this way. Ancient texts actually tell a lot about infidelity. Now imagine the most extreme sexual activity today. Could you name it? Things like orgies or BDSM or incest or same-sex activities? Well, that actually happened in ancient times, and the holy books also tell about it. When I read the book 1001 Nights, I really liked it. Well, the book 1001 Nights, begins with the story of an empress who invites her colleagues, her friends, to have an open-air sex party in the back garden of the palace, and she invites black, muscular men to do it. Now imagine what we fantasize about today, what becomes pornographic content today, existed in ancient times as well. And frankly, no matter how much we believe that the tales of 1001 Nights are fictional or semi-fictional, the setting of the story is conveyed honestly. So stop thinking that the past was sacred or holy and so on. For what? So that we understand that events that occurred in the past related to sexual issues are just as reasonable as what happens today.